I do it every quarter. I'm fairly adamant about doing it every quarter. But again, it kind of uncovers these blind spots, which then all to me ladders up to the EQ. So start, stop, continue is an exercise you can do with other, management teams. You can do it with your any teams in any kind of setting. And it's just over the course of, so since we do it quarterly, it's over the course of the last quarter. What is one thing we want to start to do? What is one thing we want to stop doing? And what is one thing we want to continue to do?
Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way the game is played. This podcast helps purpose-driven leaders unlock their highest potential so that they can play their biggest impact game. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way the game is being played. I am so excited for today's podcast. I have a longtime friend and leader. He's been at Google since 2010, I believe. He is the head of small business solutions currently for Google Canada. Chace Estes is in this locker room. Chace, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Susan. Wow, what an intro. That was awesome. Bringing the energy today. So excited to be joining you and talking about leadership. And hopefully I can impart a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of my journey on your audience. So let's get into it. Let's do this.
Let's get this party started, shall we? So Chace and I first crossed paths in 1997, I feel like, in high school when I was away at boarding school playing hockey in New Hampshire. And so we both kind of pull inspiration in our leadership from our experiences there, as well as, all the many sports that we played while we were at this beautiful school of ours. So that's where I'd love to start this episode with you, is to really just dig into some of your leadership journey and backstory. Help us understand how you arrived in this position of leadership. And was this always an aspiration of yours?
Awesome. I'll start by saying no, it wasn't always an aspiration. It kind of just naturally developed. I do think a lot of my journey in terms of getting to where I am right now, in terms of leadership position and just having this be something that gives me a lot of purpose in my life, does start in my childhood, as it often does in people's lives. And it starts with sports. So I think a lot of the skill sets that I see in leadership, I learned from sports. So this could be things like teamwork, communication, having a vision, and then working relentlessly to achieve that vision, going through adversity. So all those different things that you need to do to be a successful athlete and be a successful team player in sports, like a lot of that can be incorporated into leadership in the corporate world or kind of in any professional remit. And then I think for myself, as I was a little boy and then I kind of matured a little bit into a teenager and then into my 20s and so forth, and well beyond that now, I had some amazing role models along the way. And I think at the time, I always looked up to these role models as great individuals, great coaches, but never really until I became an adult did I reflect back on how much of an impact they had in my life.
Isn't that interesting?
So, yeah, super interesting. So like happy to share a little bit, maybe around some attributes those role models had.
Yeah, let's dig in, because one of the things we always talk about on this show, as you know, is this whole concept of the model carries the most weight. I truly believe it's the leadership development factor that packs the biggest punch in terms of how we impact and influence our teams, right? And like you said, whilst we were being influenced by these incredible models, we weren't even conscious to the fact of how they were impacting our values and our belief systems. And so I think that would be really valuable for us to share and dig into a little bit. Who do you feel like along the way were the models that carried the most weight for your leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the most simple one and a shorter one, then I'll get into a little bit more of a story for my second one. So the simpler one would just be my father. I think he's always been an inspiration to me. I think a lot of children will look up to their parents, whether it's mother, father, both. And for me, my dad was a great inspiration just because of his strong work ethic and values. I think that's always been a foundation of my career, whether it's as a student, whether it's as an athlete, whether it's in the professional life. And I definitely learned that from him, right? He has a relentless work ethic, for better or worse.
Oh, yeah.
And he has excellent values, which I always say is for the better, never for the worse. So that would be like one person that I just saw the day-to-day of how he lived his life. always, operating from a mode of the strongest integrity and that work ethic. And then the person I'll dive into a little bit more, and Susan, I know you know him as well, is our good old
English
friend,
teacher.
Coach, yeah, English
Yeah.
teacher for both of us,
Yeah.
11th grade. I'll never forget in that class. Uh,
Me
we were in that
neither.
class together, but also a legendary football coach. So Coach Walker, so Norm Walker. Um, and so, when I started my journey at Holderness, Coach Walker was a well-known coach, right? He was this infamous coach that had, I think it was 8 consecutive seasons of no loss. So I think 8 of no losses, 8 consecutive New England championships for, prep school football. And so he had this kind of legendary status just because of his success as an amazing football coach who's also an amazing teacher, English teacher, as we just mentioned.
Mhm.
And so I always think about like that gave him this platform of just people knowing who he was and looking up to him because of the success he had in the classroom and on the football field. But that's not necessarily at all what made him a leader, but gave him that platform. So I got to know him, quite well over the few seasons I played for him, and then we actually stayed in touch. All the way until he passed away. I think he passed away in
Mhm.
2011,
Mhm.
14 years ago. So we stayed in touch that whole time. And I would say there's a lot of different things I took away from Coach Walker, which at the time just, never seemed more than just like, oh, this is a man that, understands a lot of things about life that I maybe don't understand or I can learn from. Um, but as I've matured, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of what he has taught me, I've incorporated into my own leadership style. So
Mhm.
a few examples, Susan, would be, he had a lot of different sayings that he used all the time. So one is like little things are big things.
Mhm. I
So
remember
if you
that
do
one.
the little things right, those little things stack up and add up to a much bigger thing. So always do the little things right. Never cut corners, so forth and so on. So I think about that a lot. He talked a lot about how you treat everyone. And in this context of a school, he would use the janitor all the way up to the head of school. You treat everyone exactly the same. So, like, it doesn't matter your title, your age, whatever it might be, everyone is to be treated the same. So he definitely operated that way.
Mhm.
And then as high school boys on the football team, he always had these stories about winners, so-called winners versus losers. And he talked about winners being the people that did the hard work. In the summer, they did their summer reading. They worked out all summer in preparation for the sports season, in this case for football. They took their academics seriously. They didn't get involved with drugs or alcohol. They were a positive impact on the community. Those were winners, and winners were the people that were going to get places in life. Losers kind of did the exact opposite in other ways. They did the easier route. They didn't do their readings. They didn't prepare for the football season, and that led to a life of unfulfillment, or led to a life where they were often disappointed. So he'd always give these contextual stories about winners and
Mhm.
losers, and it was always about big things, so much bigger than playing sports.
Mhm.
And so that always really inspired me and kind of had me thinking too throughout as I've become an adult, my leadership journey. It's not just about the business you're in. It's not just about, your 9 to 5 or whatever it might be. It's about a much bigger picture and painting that picture. And the attributes you can exhibit as a leader really kind of fulfill or carry through your whole life. So
Mhm.
I learned a lot about that through Coach Walker, and I try to instill that in the way I lead others as well.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things I always get feedback on is how I compare everything to sports, or I see life and leadership and business through this like sporting lens. And so it's funny, the first place I go is like, well, that's the lab where I actually grew all of these skills, right? And belief systems. But now that you're mentioning it, I think that he was really brain training us in terms of how to build those bridges and parallels, right?
Mhm.
Because he's always talking about metaphors. He's always using metaphors in the context of his leadership style. I think that's what he was
Mhm.
most infamous for. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, nobody understands how human-centric, approaches to leadership can inspire greatness, excellence, and high performance more than this man, Like,
Mhm.
the one thing I always will always associate with Walker is the fact
Mhm.
that he was so tough. He had this tough Boston accent. He was this giant man. He had such a presence and power to him and stature, right?
Mhm.
But you felt how deeply this man cared about you as a human being. And I always remember how much he could push me beyond my limits because he was able to temper and perfectly balance those two attributes, right? Like I felt like he could challenge me to my limits more than almost any leader I've ever had because he was able to balance those two approaches of caring so much and then getting in your cage and like challenging your edges. I feel like that really is what sticks out the most about Mr. Walker.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. He would always say he would talk about his size all the time. So for your listeners, 6'4", 280 pounds. So he'd often on the football field, he'd stand across from you and be like, "So the player you're going to play against this weekend is going to be this big. Are you scared of me?" And we'd always be like, "No, we're not scared of you." But no, he had a massive presence to him, both in terms of stature and in terms of his personality. But no, you nailed it on the head, Susan. With uh, I think every successful leader is going to have superpower or superpowers. That's what makes people really, really strong, and every human has their own superpowers. I think for Coach Walker, his superpower, which ultimately made him the legend that he is his ability to connect with people. His like
Mm.
you we can call it empathy, we can call it caring for others, but I don't think there was one person on the football team that he didn't know their life story. He didn't know their parents' names. He didn't know, so many different things about them. He would check in on how a sibling was doing. He would check in about a big test you had coming up. So he just knew his people so well. So with that foundation of psychological safety, I know that's obviously a big buzzword over the last decade or two. I don't think I ever heard that when I was a high school student, but that foundation of psychological safety that he provided allowed him to do exactly what you just said, which is push you to your boundaries because you
Mhm.
had the trust that if he did push you, right, whether it's in the classroom or the athletic field, and he definitely pushed me a lot in the athletic field. I can definitely
I
remember
bet.
some things he said to me that I won't repeat on this podcast. But you always knew it was coming from a place of love and a place of caring, right? Because he
Mhm.
had that flip side to him, which is that very empathetic uh, approach to how he treated you as a human being, and as how he did to every single human being.
How do you feel like all of this trajectory has inspired your leadership style? How is this showing up on the play for you today, sir?
Yeah, so this is where, as I said earlier, like I never really thought about this growing up, but then when I kind of got into my, I guess, later 20s, then 30s, now 40s, I think so much of what makes people fulfilled and what ultimately gives people a lot of meaning is purpose in life. So I think, over the course of the last decade for me, like what is purpose? And for me, these people like Coach Walker, we've talked a lot about, and there's my dad, and there's been a few other people along the way. It's really thinking about the impact they made on me, and then how do I pay that forward? And so I think for me, it's that's given me a lot of purpose. It's what's allowed me to be in my role I am in right now. And as you mentioned earlier, started at Google in 2010. And so much of whether it's my career at Google, whether it's just in general as a human being, other things I do outside of work that we kind of be deemed under leadership
Mhm.
is just paying that forward to impact that next generation. Just knowing that these folks had such a huge impact on me, and
Mhm.
so I think, yeah, it all goes back to purpose for me. And I think I can, based upon Coach Walker as a huge influence, and based upon these others folks, I feel like I really can make a positive impact. So that's kind
Yeah.
of what keeps me going on a day-to-day basis, and it always kind of allows me to align to that North Star of making impact and driving, uh, you know, driving that next generation towards something that they didn't see maybe themselves. Just like how you felt, you mentioned with Coach Walker. And I know for me, like he pushed me on the football field to the point where I became a collegiate athlete in football. Never thought I was going to do that in high school, but he got me to that place. So I think about that a lot in how can I impact that next generation? Um,
Let's talk about that, shall
mhm.
we? Because
Sure, let's do it.
that's some of what I want to understand is like is
Mhm,
what aspects of this backstory do you feel like you really intentionally are trying to ripple effect out into your locker rooms,
mm,
especially right now with so much uncertainty. We were
mhm,
in talking about AQ with your team last week, right? Like
mhm,
there's never
mhm,
been a more important time for us to be
mhm,
intentional about our
mhm,
impact with our
mhm,
people. So do you
mhm.
feel like there are certain high performance drivers that are consciously showing up on the play, especially contextually right now?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. So I do think, navigating this uncertainty, and I think we'll always be in a period of uncertainty. And I know you and I chatted for a second before we started this podcast just around AI and the
Mhm.
incredible impact it's going to make on the world, but also the incredible disruption it's going to make, right? And so for some people that might cause anxiety or uneasiness, um, but I think navigating this future of uncertainty, I always think about two different things I can do as from my leadership perspective. First is what can I model, right? What can other people see in me on a day-to-day basis? So these are the folks that I work with. These are whether it's inside the office, whether it's things that I'm doing from a leadership perspective outside the office, but modeling that behavior. And so there's certain things I do. I'll go back to the foundations that I mentioned earlier with my father, right? Just the work ethic, to a certain level, right? We obviously don't want to burn out. I think you gave that RPM example of like always be on the 8,000 RPMs. Don't want to be that, but strong work ethic. Are you getting the work done you need to get done? And then the values. So modeling that. But I also think too, um, from a from a perspective of just modeling the behavior, but also showcasing that in this uncertainty, there's a lot of things we can do, right? We can control the controllables, right? And so what within all of this kind of ambiguity are actually within our control? Or is it in control to do certain when I talk internally, I'll talk about inputs versus outputs, right? We can't always control the outputs, but we can control the inputs. We can control the various whatever it might be we have to do on a day-to-day basis, the calls we have to make to our clients, the types of correspondence we're having internally with internal teams. So whatever that, like what is going into the machine for the inputs, we can always control that. And then through this uncertainty, whatever comes out of that maybe is not in our control, right? Those outputs, but we can control the controllable. So I think about that. I talk about that a lot. I also think too, with this younger generation, um, that like there's a different leadership style than when, let's say, you and I were younger. And so I always, there's a few different. I love quotes. So there are a few different quotes that I always think about too. So one is this notion of leading with a kite, not with a leash. So one example of that, if you think of like what that expression even means, leading with a leash, you have a dog on a leash, that dog is constantly tugging against you, you're constantly pulling, jerking it. It's you've seen people with dogs, and sometimes, and I know we used to have a dog or still do, Susan,
Used
or
to have a Doug, yes.
okay, sorry, that was another story. I know your dog was old last time. Bella, right?
Yeah, good
Yeah.
job.
I remember that because we had a Bella growing up. Uh, but walking a dog with a leash can sometimes be a lot of work, right? And that's a leadership style that a lot of people say, older school leadership style, leading with a leash. Leading with a kite, if you think of a kite, there's a string attached to it, and you just have to kind of tweak it. You have to pull it in, give it some boundaries, give it a little bit of guidance. But
Mhm,
reality is, you need to let people kind of run and do things. You're that role model, and then as the leader, you're providing a little bit of tweaks here and there, but you're not just yanking and pulling them. So I think of kind of this newer generation, and even in navigating the uncertainty, how do I guide with a kite, not with a leash? So
mhm.
there's tons of other things I can get into, Susan, but I think about that as well. But I think the role modeling is the biggest thing, and then that leadership style and what this younger generation needs from me.
You sound like Norm Walker right now with your metaphors. You know that, right?
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
literally
yeah.
seeing him show up on your plate. Yeah, but that's something I want to talk about because I think it's something in the trenches working with leaders all day that they're most concerned about is just how even that aspect of the disruption, which is the younger future generations that are coming up behind our back shoulder, is a very big difference between maybe how some of my older, more senior leaders were led and perhaps still like to lead, right?
Mhm,
Because those were the models that carried the most weight for them.
mhm,
That was what informed their leadership style. But
mhm,
we have 13-year-old girls. We know you cannot lead these girls, these future generations in those old school kind of power over ways, right? So
mhm,
let's get a little deeper into some of this new school guidance system that we really need to implore and even explore if we're, maybe at the more senior level of our legacy leadership journey. What do we feel like are some of the biggest tips or tricks or important aspects of skill development that we in our current kind of millennial generation need to be
Mhm.
doubling down on in our growth so that we can
Mm.
engage? Because it's very different. The engagement strategies are very different for this younger crowd.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is very different. So I'll go back to role modeling. I think that, no matter what generation you are, whether you're millennial, whether you're Gen Z, I guess Gen Alpha is the one that's after
Hmm.
Gen Z.
Hmm.
Um, Everyone wants role models, right? So I think role modeling, I'll go back to that. I think the one thing we haven't talked about a ton is EQ. I know you and I have chatted about this
Hmm.
before, but I do think that emotional intelligence. And I think, what does emotional intelligence even mean? To me, it's the perception you have of yourself is actually very aligned with the perception other people have of you. And
Hmm.
so I constantly, in this like new approach, if you want to call it that, for a lot of people I work with are Gen Z, right? So they're, I guess Gen Z is born in 95 to I think like 2010-ish.
Hmm.
And so I ask for feedback all the time. So this is like one of my leadership styles is how do I get feedback? So we all have blind spots as leaders. It could be blind spots in the way we show up. It could be blind spots in our thought process around a strategy. It could be blind spots around anything to do with leadership. And so I think one of the best ways to get feedback is just getting it constantly. So a lot of times in my one-on-ones, I will start my one-on-ones is we do this together. So each of us is giving us either feedback. We do a one up, one down. So what is one thing that you think over the course of, let's say it's a weekly one-on-one that you think has been positive in the last week that has something to do with me or something that
Hmm.
I was involved with, and then one thing you think I could have done better, or something I was involved with could have been done better, and then it goes two ways. So it opens up that conversation. It provides that psychological safety, right? It's
Hmm.
an expectation too. It's not like only when there's that kind of red alert, that emergency, do I need to go to Chace and say, hey, Chace, can we do a one on one or can we do our one up, one down? No, it's just like ingrained into the system that we're doing the one up, one down every single week. It's two ways. We're both going to get better. Um, I also do something, I don't know if you've ever heard of a start, stop, continue exercise.
Ooh, tell me.
Sure. So I do it every quarter. I'm fairly adamant about doing every quarter. But again, it kind of uncovers these blind spots, which then all to me ladders up to the EQ. So start, stop, continue is an exercise you can do with other, management teams. You can do it with your any teams in any kind of setting. And it's just over the course of, so since we do it quarterly, it's over the course of the last quarter. What is one thing we want to start to do? What is one thing we want to stop doing? And what is one thing we want to continue to do? And so I think the start to me is always in a team, no matter what the size is, they have exposure to other people, whether it's, at a corporation, whether it's outside. And so there's ideas that are floating through their heads of, hey, this would be great to bring to my team. And often, like, maybe psychological safety is not big enough or whatever it might be. It doesn't come up, but in a forum where you are asking for it, it will come up. And so the start is something that we could start doing as a management team, as a team in any context that we should be doing. The stop is one thing, and it's actually quite revealing. One thing that is probably top of mind for a lot of people on the team that just annoys them, but they'll never tell the leader of the team this. But it's an anonymous forum, so we always use Google Forms to do this.
Right.
So stop having management meetings go over every single week, or stop having you know 3-hour management meetings on a bi-weekly basis, whatever it might be. And so you're like, oh, clearly this is annoying everyone. I wish you would have told me earlier. And then it continues. Usually there's something within a team aspect or within the team dynamic that people really like. And so you want to make sure that that's able to highlight it. So for me, like, these are just two tools, right? The one up, one down every one-on-one, and the start, stop, continue in our quarterly meetings that I will help me uncover, first of all, my blind spots. But I also think help me with my overall EQ, because I want to make sure my perception of how I'm doing things is as aligned as close as possible to other people's. So these are just some tools I use. And so I'll the last thing I'll say, Susan, is going back to leading this, whether it's younger generation or to this new style of leadership. I think these types of tools are super helpful because, again, everyone wants a role model and everyone will, but I think we need to be leading a little bit more from like the EQ side. And these are just tools that will help uncover some of these blind spots and hopefully will give everyone a little bit higher EQ.
Absolutely. Another aspect of what drives resiliency and AQ, right, is having that high emotional intelligence skills. Love to put emphasis on the word skills because yes, this is something that we consciously need to rep out in
Mhm.
our skill development. I was just in a locker room before this podcast recording and we were talking about it doesn't matter where your entry point is. As human beings, we all kind of have a different set point with our natural inclination, our nature towards empathy. But I don't think there's ever been a more important time in human history for us to get conscious with our skill
Mhm.
development in this area. We're talking about AI a second ago, and I think that's what we're predicting is going to be the most important skill of them all in terms of our leadership. Forbes actually rated it the #1 leadership skill of them all in 2024, right? But I
Mhm.
think it doesn't matter where you are on that spectrum, folks. It's about to get real up in here. So if we don't have
Mhm.
the EQ skills and we're not managing that consciously and intentionally and building that as if it were a skill, yeah,
Mhm.
I would be concerned about the sustainability not only of yourself in your own
Mhm.
leadership lane, but also of your teams and your organizations too.
Absolutely. How do I balance, going back to boundaries, my outside of work life and my inside of work life? So when I'm actually in work, I can be on, and I think we've probably all done this, and we still probably I still do this, but we have our days, and there's no such thing as a perfect human being, where maybe we had a late night, maybe there was a party, there was a red-eye flight, there was a something. You can just clearly see that you're not on your A game, and that has a ripple effect across the organization. So the one thing I try to do is just be the best version of myself outside of work. So inside of work, I can bring my A game every day as much as possible.
I always say that being a leader is like being a pro athlete. I want our listeners to hear a little bit from your back pocket. What do you feel like is one leadership habit or thing that you do in your self leadership? We were talking about self leadership last week too, and the
Mm,
importance of how that really is where we start to take responsibility for our impact on our people. But is there one thing that you do every single day to ensure that you
mm.
show up, play all out, fully engaged, high impact for your people?
One thing I do every single day. Great
That fuels
question.
that performance or
Yeah,
fuels that model, the model that you want, the tone you want to set in your locker
yeah,
rooms. Do you feel like there's one, like for me,
mm,
I have to exercise. That's like what
yeah,
fuels this
yeah.
high energy, enthusiastic state that I'm
Mhm,
passionate about bringing to my
mhm.
audience. But what would that be for you?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, I mean, there's so many different things to distill to one, which I will. I'll do one, I promise. I try to be the best version of myself outside of work so I can be the best version of myself inside of work. So that's my one thing, and then I'll, like, unpack that a tiny bit if that's helpful.
Please.
Okay, so I think the more healthy I can be outside of work, so whether that's exercise, whether it's eating healthy, whether that's sleeping regular, like getting X amount of sleep every single night, whether it's not drinking much, all these different things that would be deemed healthy.
Hmm.
I'm very conscious of that, and also part of that maybe is just aging, because I feel like to be the best version of myself in work, which is super important, right? If you think of a typical day for a lot of leaders, you're in back-to-back meetings all day, every day. You have a lot of people that are um, they want to see the best of you, and you have to
Hmm.
be on your A game, right? And it's not just the mental acuity and being sharp and yeah, being articulate and having great ideas, but it's also bringing energy, right? The energy
Hmm.
a leader brings permeates throughout the whole team, organization, and so I think, one thing I'm very conscious of, Susan, is just how do I balance, going back to boundaries, my outside of work life and my inside of work life. So when I'm actually in work, I can be on. And I think we've probably all done this, and we still probably I still do this, but we have our days. There's no such thing as a perfect human being, where maybe we had a late night, maybe there was a party, there was a red-eye flight, there was a something, and you can just clearly see that you're not on your A game, and that has a ripple effect across the whole organization. So the one thing I try to do is just be the best version of myself outside of work. So inside of work, I can bring my A game every day as much as possible.
I always say that being a leader is like being a pro athlete. It
Yep.
really is. Like you really
Mhm.
have to, you know how in athletics we always had to think about not even the night before, but the 48-hour rule. The 2 nights
Mhm.
before had to be
Yep.
like a really solid sleep, right? Because that's
Yep.
showing up on the ice 2 days later, or doing the because I was talking about last week how I love to do cold dips, right? For my
Yep.
active recovery. But
Mhm.
it really is true because our nervous system is what fuels performance, right? It's
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
drives the quality of our energy and the quantity of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of parallels there too. The
Yeah.
last place I'd like to stop on this train
Mm,
today is my favorite place to stop on the show, which is asking you when you go all the way
mm,
up and to the right, aspirationally, Chase, all the way to the
mm,
rocking chair, and you
mhm.
think about how you know you made it count. How will
Mhm.
you know? What do you want that legacy to be when you look back and see the impact you've made?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I think, and you and I chatted about this a tiny bit last week. Um, I think the fortunate thing around where let's say I am in my career or, a lot of other folks I'm sure that are listening is, I mean, you have a certain amount of success in your career and people can deem success however they want it to be.
Mhm.
Whether that's promotions, whether it's titles, whether that's you name it. You realize that like all of that actually doesn't really matter. What really matters is the impact you're making on others.
Mhm.
And so for me, like what gives me the most amount of energy, I talked about purpose earlier and all that, but what gives me is just that impact. So, people that will come up to me like, Chase, if it wasn't for you, I would never be here in my career, or if it wasn't for you, I would have never done X, Y, or Z. So that kind of rocking chair moment, hopefully it's a long, long, long ways away.
Let it be.
Is just it's, and I don't have a number, I don't have a metric that I can share with you, but just the most amount of impact I can possibly make, positive impact in others. And we'll go back to how we started the podcast with Coach Walker, right? It was for him, it was never around this. Although it gave him the platform, it was never around being this legendary football coach and or English teacher. It was the impact that he made on others. That's his legacy, right? That's like you and I, 25 years plus later, talking about this. It's all because of the impact he made on your life, my life, and literally
So many
thousands of
others.
others. And so I keep thinking about that. There's not a metric of you name it, like that's not important. It's just the amount of impact I can make. So people say, if it wasn't for Chase, uh, I would be a much different human being, and Chase made me a better human being. So I think that would be my rocking chair moment. Maybe at some point in my life, I'll give a metric to it of the amount of people or whatever, but that would be success for me 40, 50 years from now, whatever it is, hopefully that long.
I just think it's such a cool perspective to play with in our perceptual powers, right? It's not even a
Mhm,
numbers thing, it's not a quantity thing, it's just a
mhm,
magnitude thing.
mhm,
That's
mhm,
why we call it the ripple effects. Because you imagine being in the rocking chair and seeing all of that person and their family and their business and and
mhm.
having that type of perspective of all the lives that you've changed in
Yeah,
significant
yeah.
ways.
The multiplier effect, right? And so that's why, and I know we're wrapping this up, but that's why as I've aged, I've gotten so conscious of bringing my best self to work. Because I think there's probably, when again, I know I mentioned this earlier, we all do this still to this day, but in our 20s, sometimes it's hard to bring our best self to work, especially on Mondays
Mhm.
if you've, had a big weekend. And so, very, very conscious of the how I live my life outside of work is going to only make me stronger in work, which is actually only going to make a more of a positive impact slash that ripple effect we just chatted about.
Well, I definitely know that this interview has inspired a magnitude in terms of its ripple effect on our leaders' consciousness, their level of consciousness. I think that is the most obvious impact in terms of your through line is just like how conscious you've been about these Leadership 2.0 principles ever since we first met in high school. And I
Hmm.
know that's what I'm trying to do on this mission to change the way the game is being played is get leaders to just get conscious with it. It's just one choice. And that's something
Hmm.
we all can control, right? And I think
Hmm.
inspiration like this definitely makes it feel a lot easier for those who maybe, are up against it in terms of their bandwidth. I feel like
Hmm.
that's the hardest part of my job, right? Is making the case for why we should want to. But now I think
100%.
I think
Hmm.
we're all feeling the inspo. Thank you, sir. If people are wanting to reach out to you because they're feeling so inspired by your story, where would you like them to reach you?
LinkedIn's the best.
Chace
Always,
Estes,
yes,
LinkedIn. We'll put all that in the show notes.
perfect. But yeah,
But
LinkedIn's the best. I fairly regular to checking on it. So if someone reach out to me LinkedIn, I will respond. Maybe not that day, but I will respond. But that's the best place. And thank you so much for having me, Susan. This was amazing. So happy I could speak with you and hopefully pass along at least a few tidbits of whether it's part of my journey or it's inspiration to help some of your listeners in their journey. So thanks again for having me, Susan. This was awesome.
the ripple effects are real in the airwaves right now, my friend. I knew that this would be high impact. Thank you for agreeing to come in and share your wisdom with our audience. I know this, and again, this interview is saturated with why we're so passionate about Leadership 2.0 and this methodology that's focused around mindset. There's so much mindset strategy in everything that you just laid down for our people. So thank you. We are in the year of co-creation here at the Leadership Launchpad Project. That means we want to hear from you. Just like Chace was talking about, that feedback is gold. We want to know if this is hitting the mark. We want to know if there are certain aspects of what we spoke about in this interview that you want to learn more about or go deeper with. Please send me an email, susan@elitehighperformance.com. I'm so enjoying hearing from our people. And for all other things Leadership 2.0, you heard me talking about today, all those locker rooms around building trust and psych safety, diversity, equity, inclusion, how to curate your dream team conditions. Go on over to the website, elitehighperformance.com. And thank you. So much gratitude to our listeners. None of this would be possible without you. You are the inspiration behind it all. Your highest potential is my passion. So let's go, A-Team. Let's unleash it together. We'll see you guys next week.